Mingalabar, welcome to this workshop. This workshop is going to be on PPP, on public-private partnerships. We would love to be with you in Nepita to give this workshop, but unfortunately, we have to use this online feature in terms of that. So this workshop is organized by McGill University with the help of RDRC and the Government of Canada, and of course with the help from the Myanmar Development Institute. To do this workshop, like the one we've done in the past, we actually use faculties from McGill. And for this particular one on PPP, I thought it would draw on the great expertise we have at McGill University and the Institute for the Study of International Development. The Institute for the Study of International Development, ISID, has a particular type of professors. We have professors of practice. Who is a professor of practice? These are professors that we have at McGill, and we draw on their great experience that they have in terms of their careers. We have professors practice at McGill who were former prime ministers of Canada. We have people who were involved in the financial world. We have people who were involved in the Government of Canada, people involved with NGOs around the world, and everything else. And we have one special person for you to teach here in our program, and it's Professor Jamal Saghir. Professor Jamal Saghir, as I said, is a professor of practice at McGill. He's been with us since 2016. And he has a lot of interesting experience, and he's a great teacher. So let me introduce to you Professor Saghir, and who's right here with us on our webcam. Hello, Professor, how are you?
Good morning, Frank. Good morning, everybody. I'm fine, thank you. I'm speaking from Washington, D.C., where I am.
Yes, and see, I'm in beautiful McGill right now, beautiful Montreal, and we're all, unfortunately, through this pandemic, involved in this lockdown, so we're going to use that. Jamal, please tell us a little bit about you. I understand you, of course, studied in Canada. You had your graduate degrees at Laval University, and then you did not become an academic. You actually worked with the government. You joined the government of Quebec, I think, the province of Quebec, and their finance department. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, my experience is a bit different from what you've seen around the world from people like me. I was among the first to be appointed, actually, by the government of Quebec to work in the early 80s on the privatization program of the province. At that time, Quebec used to be heavily state-owned on every single sector, from fishery business to airline business. So I was appointed by the Prime Minister at that time to be economic advisor to the Minister of Finance to work to design a privatization program for Quebec, on which we privatized a lot of company, and also to introduce a public-private partnership. Here we talk about 1982s. From that part also, I was responsible of the federal prevention from the perspective of Quebec, where the deregulation of the financial market at that time in the 83, 84, that's where the liberalization of the financial market in the United States had an impact on Canada, and I was involved also in the federal provincial relation. From there, I worked.
Yeah, I think you migrated south, right?
From there, actually, after being the chief of staff of the Minister of Finance for privatization and financial deregulation for many years, I was called by USAID, actually, in the State Department, somehow, one day. I was in my office in Quebec City, and I was told I was offered a job to go to Tunisia, where to become economic advisor on privatization and private sector participation for the Prime Minister of Tunisia, a country that I didn't know well, actually. So we moved there. We spent 2 years, where also I designed a PPP program, privatization program for Tunisia, which went successfully at that time. And then in the early 90s, here the World Bank coming to pick me up. And they offered me a job that I couldn't refuse in Washington, D.C. And I spent 26 years of my life in Washington, D.C., where I work around the world. I came at the time of the dismantling of the Berlin Wall, which is very important. At that time, what we call the Washington Consensus, where many of the G7 countries wanted to see all this reform being introduced in the former Soviet Union countries in Eastern Europe to become irreversible. and therefore public-private partnership, privatization, all those new ideas were put in place. And I was among the first in the World Bank to be hired in this domain. And I worked in many, many countries in Asia, Latin America, Africa, Middle East, former Soviet Union country. And over
But
the years,
mhm.
I
You did
became
more than privatization, though, right? You also you were involved in issues about sustainable development and climate,
yeah.
I think.
So over the years, actually, since I developed this expertise, I became the director of energy, transport, water, and infrastructure at the World Bank. And
Yeah.
for the World Bank, what we call the corporate director, I was positioning the World Bank at that time. And from there, I worked for 10 years, actually. I had one of the largest portfolio in the World Bank. And from there, I moved to work on one of the poorest country region in the world, which is Africa. And I became the director of sustainable development. Director of sustainable development covers 13 sectors: energy, transport, water, rural electrification, environment, social development, rural transportation. And I worked there for many years, and I basically designed a lot of PPP projects in the power sector and the water project. And I had one of the largest departments in the World Bank, 500 staff, a huge budget, and we used to do around $8 billion of lending per year. From there, I took an early retirement. I was privileged to be picked up by McGill as professor of practice, thanks to the openness of McGill. As you know, I went back to my country, if you want. And here,
Yes.
there since 2016, I'm privileged. I publish a lot. I sit on few boards around
Yes.
the world, and at the same time, I give advice on few issues. And I'm very
I
privileged.
know. In fact, we've published too the Institute for the Study International policy briefs and working papers. I know the last 2 months we have two of your papers, right? You have a paper on titled "Preparing for a Looming Water Crisis: Lessons Learned from COVID-19 in the Middle East and North African Countries," and you have another one on post-COVID-19 New World Configurations and Climate Change Actions, two urgent priorities. So you're very busy.
Yeah, these are the area that now I'm focusing more and more, in addition to PPP, which is my normal business, if you want. I spend a lot
Right.
of time on the issue of climate change, since I am on the board of the Global Center on Adaptation, which is chaired by the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. And this, I spend a lot of time on work on climate adaptation issue, where also some PPP issue will be involved, actually, and how we look at it.
So
this,
tell me then,
yeah.
for our participants here at Myanmar Development Institute, what do you think PPP, is an important thing, and what are the advantages as well as the potential disadvantages? And maybe briefly, and then maybe also briefly, if you could tell us what are the modules that you're preparing for us? How are you going to do that?
No, I think first of all, we have to look at all these issues, PPP, in a very pragmatic way. I don't want us to look at this model in any dogmatic way. I always start with a very simple assumption. Whoever can provide the best service at the lowest cost should do it. Is the public sector can do it? Show it to me. Can the private sector better do it? Show it to me. So we have to be extremely pragmatic. What matters here is the service delivery to the people, especially to the poor people who cannot afford those services usually. And if taking this assumption as a basic, we looked at what the public sector around the world has been doing. We have seen some very good public utilities, frankly. We've seen it in Singapore, we've seen it in Thailand, we've seen it in Japan, but we've seen also very poorly run public utilities. In general, they are inefficient. They don't serve all the people. And sometimes the service that's being delivered is bad. I've seen it personally in Indonesia. I've seen it in Laos. I've seen it in Vietnam. I've seen it across China. I've seen it in Africa. I've seen it in Latin America. Why? It's not because the civil servants are not able to do a good job, but they are not being given the means to do a good job. And therefore, if you can call on the private sector to bring efficiency, innovation, and funding, why not?
Yeah.
The idea here is to bring the expertise of the private sector, bring it with the public sector who own the asset, in a partnership relation. As you will hear me in these models, I'll always repeat the same sentence. Among the three P's, the most important in the PPP is the second one, the partnership, public-private partnership, or the third one, it depends how you want to put the P. But the word partnership is the most important because it is looking on the same direction, looking for a win-win solution to help deliver better service. There are some PPP that went very well. There are some PPP that did not succeed in achieving their objective. Why? Sometimes government are not serious about PPP. They want to please an international community or donors. They launch a bid, the bid fail, or when they sign the bid, they don't follow it. A PPP is a model that has to be implemented in a transparent way, through competitive bid, and a clear legal enabling environment. In this context, what we will do in this course, we will have 7 modules. First, we will give you an introduction to PPP. I know that some of you know what it is because we have been talking about PPP now for 30 years. But there's some nuances we'd like to bring because even the definition of PPP until now is not yet very clear. So we'll give you an introduction to the PPP concept. Then we'll talk about the institutional framework on which PPP operate. Then I will zoom into the legal and regulatory framework, and I insist on the word regulatory framework because this is important as much as important in terms of enabling legal environment. How you'll be regulating the project, how you'll be regulating the contract. There are different forms of contractual relation between different parties. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll zoom into the process and the type of PPP. And here there is a huge spectrum. We can start from the service contract up to the BOT, up to the concession, and we'll have around 8 to 9 models that will be presented. Again, my objective here and our objective at McGill is to present you a menu. We are not here to give you one size fits all. We're going to give you the menu. We're going to give you the advantage and disadvantage. And then we're going to talk about how you procure this PPP. What is the process and the different 6 steps that you need to follow if you want to do it properly. But once you've done this, it's not enough. When you awarded the contract and the PPP operators start functioning, what you're going to do as government? So what's the role of government post-award? What's the role of public policy? And how this public good aspect will be looked at it from the private sector perspective. Of course, we're going to discuss the risk allocation between the public and the private. We'll discuss the interaction between different parties. Finally, we're going to give you a few case studies based on different parts of the world. We'll talk about the European cases where there are a lot of case studies. We give example from Asia because I think it's important to see that around you, many countries have done it and they've done a good job. Then based on those lessons learned cases, we will draw some lessons learned. I think this is important. Some good lessons learned, and I will tell you some bad lessons learned as well. Finally, we'll give you an exercise so that you can give your view, you can implement what you learned from these modules and from this course. We would like to be interactive as much as we can. I will make myself available, and Frank will provide you my email. We'll provide it to you probably in the first introductory to interact with you, to be open-minded. We would like you to learn from my experience. I have experience over 40 years. We would like you certainly to learn from McGill, who has a huge knowledge in terms of transferring knowledge, transferring the right knowledge to the people of your country. Thank you.
Great. Jazuba, this is great. So it's very exciting, Jamal. So as you can see, for this workshop on PPP, we're going to draw on the wealth of experience that Professor Jamal has. And we'll be doing some interactions through our e-learning website, through the chat and through the questions period and everything else. And there might be even Zoom live sessions as we go. And so we're really hoping that you'll be able to appreciate the learning, that you'll draw on your own experience in Myanmar to ask some great questions, Professor Jamal. And Professor Jamal, I know, will love to interact with you. So thank you. And I'm taking you now to Professor Jamal's lectures. So you go be able to look at Module 0, Module 1, Module 2, Module 3, up to Module 7. And I really know that you're going to have a great time learning with Professor Jamal. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Frank. Thank you. Thanks a lot.